بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه الطاهرين ما دام ما في السماوات والأرضين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما اللهم إنا نسألك علما ينفعنا ارفعنا اللهم إنا نسألك علما نافعا ورزقا واسعا وعملا متقبلا وشفاء من كل داء نوينا التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم وبعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Alhamdulillah, all thanks and praise due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all of His blessings that He has bestowed upon us. We beseech Allah, we ask Allah to increase us in those blessings. لَإِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ وَلَإِن كَفَرْتُمْ إِنَّ عَذَابِي لَشَدِيدٌ. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from amongst the grateful ones. We thank Allah for the opportunity to come together to acquire such knowledge that will guide us to and guide us along the straight path. Today, by the grace and mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have reached the chapter dealing with divorce. We are on lesson number 116, on number 116, and we continue with our reading on a pending divorce. There are a number of case scenarios that we have discussed, and today inshallah, and for the next 3 or 4 lessons, we will still be discussing pending divorce, as Taqiyuddin al-Hisni goes to length in terms of the multiple scenarios that apply. The first case which we do today, bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala, reads as follows. What if the husband says to the wife? The husband says to the wife, In ra'ayti fulanan fa anti taliqun. So we had discussed already that divorce is divided into 2 categories. The one would be a consummate divorce. A person says to his wife, Anti taliqun, you are divorced, and then she is thereby divorced. Consummate. It is enacted immediately. Alternatively, a person may say to his wife, Anti taliqun in dakhalti dar, that you are divorced if you enter into the home. Should she enter into the home, then she will be divorced. These are the examples we are looking at. Another such pending divorce, Talaq al-mu'allaq, a pending divorce, would read as follows. In ra'ayti fulanan, if you see so and so, then you are divorced. What happens? Consequent to that, the lady, she sees him, whether she is living, rather whether he is living or dead, or whether he may be sleeping. In whatever state she sets eyes on him, in whatever state she sees him in, then she will be divorced, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Then there's some detail here in this particular regard. The interesting thing for me in these particular examples would be that, number one, from my side, I wouldn't advise a person divorces his wife in a pending manner. Either you divorce your wife or you hold on to your wife. Imsakun bi ma'ruf, tasrihun bi ihsan. You hold on in a good way or you part ways in a good manner. When reading through these examples, one of the phenomenon that we discover is that this particular concept, for example, here to be ru'ya. What is meant by ru'ya? Look, in another context, when you look at ru'ya from a theological perspective, are we going to behold Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or not? So then what is meant by beholding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that particular context? But we're not in a theological framework, we're in a fiqh framework. So if a person says to his wife, if you see so and so, you are divorced, what is meant by seeing? So in looking through the detail, let us focus, number one, on the fact that it is a pending divorce, but very importantly, allow ourselves to look at these concepts, because the concepts would avail us, whether we discussing the concept in relation to divorce or any other particular subject matter or concept, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, framework rather. So when we look now to the concept of ra'aytu, what does it mean? So when she sees the person, whether the person is living, dead or sleeping, she has seen the person, and therefore the divorce is going to fall. Furthermore, the divorce will occur, seeing a part of him would suffice. So the text reads, Taqiyuddin al-Hisni explains to us that seeing a part of him would also suffice, number one. If she sees him completely covered or in a dream, then the divorce will not fall. because this does not amount to ru'ya, it does not amount to sight. Keep in mind the latter part. Our fiqh is very specific, our fiqh is very precise. So if she sees him in a dream, that's not technically speaking seeing, so therefore the divorce will not occur. If she sees him in clear water or from the other side of a clear glass, then she will not be divorced. This is also an interesting issue. Why? Because we find that if the person is immersed in water and the water is completely transparent and she looks at him, she has seen him, therefore the divorce occurs. Alternatively, the person is not in water, in clear water, but she sees him through a clear glass, he's standing on the other side of the glass. Will the divorce fall or not? The divorce will fall because it amounts to seeing the person. Interestingly, in terms of the note that I've made here, you would notice that our scholars don't mention when she sees him in a mirror. In other words, she sees the reflection. So they're walking past a pond, a clear pond, and she doesn't see him, but she sees his reflection in the water. Would that be considered as sight? We're going to look at that inshallah in another chapter. But for now, we continue with the text. The second slide reads as follows. What if the husband says to the wife, in kallamti, let me just make sure that I'm following the sequence. So the first example was, if you see so and so, you are divorced. The second example is, in kallamti zaydan fa anti talikun. If you speak to Zayd, if you engage in an interlocution with Zayd, if you speak to Zayd, fa anti talikun, then you are divorced. Again, as per our initial example, we're not focusing too much on the fact that it is a pending divorce. And you shouldn't be pending divorces as such, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. The second interest, or of equal interest to us, is using this type of formula. What does it mean? In this example, the whole idea of mukalama, engaging in speech. Because if she engages in speech, then she's divorced. But if she doesn't engage in speech, then she's not divorced. So what amounts to speech? That would be a focus point over here. And then this particular idea, understanding what speech is over here, and then we transport it in another chapter. For example, whilst you're praying, speech is not permitted. So when we get a good idea of what speech means, we're able to apply it across the board, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So let's see what the scholars have to say in this particular regard. So they say, what are the consequences of the above? If he is drunk or insane, the divorce will fall. So if you speak to Zayd, then you are divorced. So she speaks to Zayd, but Zayd is either drunk, insane, it doesn't matter. We've had speech, whether he understands it or not, in this particular case, is of no consequence. She has spoken to him, the divorce will fall. Number two, if she speaks to him whilst he is sleeping or unconscious, the divorce will not occur. The divorce will not occur. Why? Because that would not be considered as speech. And now again, looking through the second example, we would want to redefine our understanding of the first example. If he is drunk or insane, the divorce will fall. Why? Insanity, that is very clear. You cannot engage with speech with an insane person. When he's drunk due to his own negligence. So in that particular instance, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, then she has spoken to him and the divorce will fall. If he is sleeping or unconscious, then the divorce will not fall, and Allah knows best. If she speaks to him whilst she is insane, the talaq will not occur according to Ibn Sabbagh. According to Ibn Sabbagh, the talaq will not occur. If she speaks to him while she is intoxicated, the talaq will occur, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. The last case here would be if she lowers her voice to the extent that he is unable to listen or to hear. The divorce will not occur, even though something may reach his ear and he understands the intent therefrom. So in the last scenario there, that if she lowers the voice to the extent that he's unable to hear, so not being able to hear means that there was no speech, even though the person may surmise and basically get the idea from the circumstances in terms of what the lady wants or what she is saying. But despite that, the divorce will not occur. Why? Because that is not considered as speech, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. We continue with the same detail regarding the same case, and that is إن كلمتِ زيدا فأنت طالق. If you were to speak to Zayd, then you are divorced. Taqiyuddin provides a bit more of detail. The detail is interesting and Allah knows best. If she calls him from afar and he is unable to hear, the divorce will not occur. I think that one reads fairly simple, because she is calling him from afar and is unable to hear. So have you spoken to the person? No, you haven't spoken to the person. And since you haven't spoken to the person, the divorce will not occur, and Allah knows best. The second scenario looks as follows. If the wind carries the voice and causes it to reach his ears, he will not be divorced. This is an interesting one, and Allah SWT knows best. Let's read through that again. If the wind carries the voice and causes it to reach his ears, he will not be divorced. Because under normal circumstances, that speech would not have reached him. It is only now the wind as an accident which reaches him, and the wind has actually carried that message. Had it not been for the wind, then you would not have heard. So we're looking at speech under normal circumstances. So had normal circumstances been prevailing and there was no wind, he would not have heard, and therefore she did not speak to him, and thus the divorce will not occur, and Allah SWT knows best. We look at the next scenario. If the distance is a hearing distance, but he does not hear for some other reason, like preoccupation with something else, then the divorce will occur. Let's read through that again. If the distance is a hearing distance, so then the default would be what? That you're supposed to be hearing what I'm saying. So the lady comes, the wife, and speaks to him, speaks to Zayd, and she is standing within hearing distance, and she utters something, but he's not hearing. He's not hearing not because he's out of hearing distance. He's not hearing because his mind may be preoccupied with something else. So what are we going to say? Did she speak to him? Yes, she did, and therefore the divorce will occur, and Allah SWT knows best. The last one reads as follows. If he does not hear due to the wind or deafness, then there's a difference of opinion in this particular regard. Based on Imam Nawawi's argument, it would not occur for a person who does not hear despite or when the voice is raised. So let's look at this and let's discuss it a bit. Imam Nawawi rahimahullah is talking about a person who does not hear due to the wind or due to the deafness. So in other words, he's within hearing distance, but he can't hear either due to the wind howling, climatic conditions, weather conditions, natural noise, or he has some form of deafness. Then what happens? Imam Nawawi rahimahullah says the divorce would not occur. In which instance? For a person who does not hear despite the voice being raised, and Allah SWT knows best. This just demands of me to go back to the first scenario, and that is the scenario is if she calls him from afar and is unable to hear, the divorce will not occur. That's number one. Number two, if the wind carries the voice and causes it to reach his ears, he will not be divorced. If the distance is a hearing distance, but he does not hear for some other reason, then the divorce will occur. And lastly, that if he does not hear, so in other words, my understanding of the scenario is he is within hearing distance, but he does not hear. Why does he not hear? Because of a deafness. Then the divorce will not occur, and Allah SWT knows best. The next situation, and here we're going on to a completely new scenario. The complete new scenario reads as follows. The husband says to the wife, إن سرقت مني شيئا فأنت طالق. If you steal something from me, sariqa, فأنت طالق, then you are divorced. Again, as we mentioned before, pending the divorce is not something that we recommend as such, and Allah SWT knows best. It's a personal opinion, though it's completely permissible. So in this particular instance, a person is pending the divorce, and what is he saying? That if you steal from me. And in Arabic, again being very precise, there's a difference between sariqa on the one side, stealing, and khiyana on the other side, and that is treachery. So now the author is going to give an example. If she steals, in other words, she goes to the safe, she breaks open the safe, and she takes money therefrom, that is referred to as sariqa, that is stealing, and the divorce will fall. What happens in the following scenario? The scenario would be as follows, that the husband hands over a case to her, a case full of money for safekeeping, for example, and then she takes from that bag. Now, stealing is defined as taking something from a place of safekeeping. And perhaps to facilitate a further understanding of our example is that you don't have access to it. So it's like a forced entry and taking something from a place of safekeeping. Here the person is giving you a bag of money, the husband gives the wife a bag of money, and she dips her hand into this bag and takes therefrom. Is this referred to as sariqah? Technically speaking, it is not referred to as sariqah, it is a form of khiyana. And the husband didn't say, in khana yakhunu khuntini, if you are treacherous towards me, then you will be divorced. He says, no, if you're going to steal from me, then you are divorced. So technically speaking, the divorce should not fall, and Allah SWT knows best. And that is basically what our scholars say, what Abu Shuja says in this particular regard. The divorce will not occur because it is treachery and not stealing. Then Taqiyuddin al-Hisni has an interesting comment over here. And the comment basically amounts to the following, but not to get my wires crossed, I'm going to be reading the text directly. Taqiyuddin al-Hisni says, وَفِي نَظَرٌ من جهة أن العامي لا يفرق بين السرقة والخيانة. Taqiyuddin al-Hisni takes issue in this particular regard. What does he say? He says that look, in terms of a lay person, he doesn't distinguish between sariqa on the one hand, stealing, and khiyana and treachery on the other hand. فإذا فسر السرقة بالخيانة. So now what happens is, if he explains stealing as treachery, because according to him, whether you take it from a place of safekeeping or you dip your hands into that bag, for him both is called, the wife in this particular regard, for her, both would be considered as stealing. So then, in her frame of mind, she's actually stealing. وَأَوْقَعْنَا عَلَيْهِ الطَّلَاقَ عَمَلًا بِعُرْفِهِ وَاعْتِقَادِهِ. So then we would then enact the divorce based on what? Based on the current custom in terms of the understanding, and not drawing a distinction between stealing and treachery, and based on his belief. Because when the wife does it and dips her hands in, husband said to her, if you're going to steal from me, then you're divorced. Let's say she wants to be divorced. So in terms of her mind tells her that me dipping my hand into the bag, that amounts to stealing. And she doesn't consider it to be sariqah. So if you look at that particular perspective, like Taqiyuddin al-Hisni is doing, then you would consider it to be stealing, though it's technically speaking khiyana, and the divorce would occur. And Allah SWT knows best. If one thinks about it really, the opinion expressed by Abu Shuja, or rather from our other scholars, because most of this commentary in terms of the copious amount of examples being provided of a pending divorce, it comes from Taqiyuddin al-Hisni, and he quotes our other ancient scholars, our other giants. So in terms of what they're saying, that does appear to make much more sense, and Allah SWT knows best. And that is that if she were to dip her hands in there, that is treachery, despite what her belief may be, and therefore she will not be divorced, and Allah SWT knows best. We move on to the next example, bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is also now a new example altogether. Again, the idea is that working through these examples helps us in terms of gaining a degree of tafaqquh, in terms of the way the mind of the jurist works, number one, and then these concepts that are being covered, because this is an address. People are being addressed in a particular way, spoken to in a particular way. Depending on their understanding of that concept and how they react, we, reading through these examples, gain a better understanding of the concepts. We've looked at the concept of sadiqa, we looked at the concept of khiyana, we looked at the concept of ru'ya, we looked at the concept of kalam. If you speak and then you divorce, what does it actually mean, and so forth. Now we go to another issue, and the issue reads as follows. What if the debtor says to the creditor, and the debtor now would be the husband owes somebody money. So the creditor comes to him, and then he says to the creditor, in akhadtu, or rather in akhadta ma laka alayya famra'ati taliqun. This person, he issues a pending divorce in this particular manner. Perhaps he wants to scare off the debtor, who may be a very socially responsible person. So he says to the creditor, look, you want to get your money? In akhadta, if you take ma laka alayya, what is rightfully yours upon me, in other words the liability, I owe you 1,000 rands, so if you take that 1,000 rands from me, famra'ati taliqun, you can do that, but if you do that, then my wife is divorced. So what are the consequences of the above? Taqiyuddin al-Hisni explains to us, and he says the following. What does he say? Number one, and here we need to, I think, listen carefully, and it's very, very interesting in terms of the construct which our scholars give, and I think it's very beneficial as well also to discuss. What does the author say? What does Taqiyuddin al-Hisni say? He says, if the creditor takes it from the debtor by his volition, then she will be divorced. What is meant thereby? So you, the creditor, a person tells you, if you take what belongs to you from me, in other words, if you exact your 1,000 rands from me, then my wife is divorced. Now the creditor, by the creditor's own volition, comes and he takes the money. You owe me 1,000 rands, thank you. He takes the 1,000 rands, the lady will be divorced. There's no question about that. What about the alternative? An alternative looks as follows. So the first would apply whether the debtor pays willingly or under duress. It doesn't matter now. Because now the creditor, let's say for example, he comes and he attaches a good and he sells the good and he takes that. So now it's under duress. Or the debtor basically just gives it willingly, the 1,000 rands. It doesn't matter. The important point is that the divorce is tied into when the creditor takes the money from the debtor. So whether it's willingly or unwillingly, it's going to apply, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Third scenario. Our Iraqi scholars are of the opinion, and this is now very interesting, let's read through this. Our Iraqi scholars are of the opinion that if the Hakim should take the right from the debtor and hand it over to the creditor, then his wife will not be divorced. Because the creditor did not take it right from the debtor, but rather from the Hakim, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So there you have a situation. If a third party, another situation, if a third party, according to Imam Ad-Daraki, if a third party pays it for him, she will not be divorced. Because according to Ad-Daraki, it is not his haqq, but a substitute for his haqq. So if a third person pays it, and then his wife will not be divorced. Why? Because the creditor did not take his haqq, but rather he took a substitute for his haqq. So if you wanted to, you can argue in these lines that the creditor did take it from the debtor. But now when somebody else pays it off on behalf of the debtor, so then technically speaking, the creditor didn't take his haqq as such, he took a substitute for his haqq. So subhanAllah, when you read through issues like these, it helps us to define and also develop a proper construct, a proper tafaqquh, a proper understanding in terms of how things should be, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. That's a very interesting one from Daraki in that particular regard. We go on to what is the last slide. I find that in teaching these issues in terms of the pending divorces, teaching it goes rather quickly, but the preparation does somehow take time. Why? Because it requires a bit of orientation, because when we read something, we read it in a particular manner. But it's important for us to sort of come out of that paradigm in which we read things and realign ourselves to the paradigm, the Arabic paradigm, number one, and then the fiqhi paradigm, number two, which is based really on the Arabic paradigm. But at times it's a very different paradigm. And if you don't understand the Arabic correctly, then one will not gain the proper tafaqquh. So it comes across somewhat simple in terms of the explanation, but in terms of reading and understanding, it may present a challenge at times if one is drawing directly from the text, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He grant all of us understanding of His way. May yuridillahu bi khairin yufaqqih fi din. Allah wishes goodness for a person, Allah grants that person understanding of his religious matters, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. The last issue which we do for today, inshallah, in today's lesson, is what if a person says to his wife, in kallamtuki fa anti talikun. If I were to speak to you, then you are divorced. A husband says to his wife, if I were to speak to you, in kallamtuki, if I were to speak to you, then you are divorced. And then the husband repeats himself immediately thereafter. So he says, in kallamtuki fa anti talikun. If I speak to you, then you are divorced. And then he repeats exactly what he says to her. In kallamtuki fa anti talikun. Let's say he intends like an emphasis thereby. Has he spoken to her after that pronouncement? He's spoken to her and she will be divorced. If he follows it up by saying to her, fa'ari dhalika, know that. In other words, like says, in kallamtuki fa anti talikun, and I'm serious about it. So that idea of I'm serious about it, you must know that. It is a speech to her after he had said to her that if I were to speak to you, then you are divorced, then the divorce will fall, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. If he says to her, in bada'tuki bil kalam fa anti talikun, فبدأته لم تطلق وتنتحل اليمين. If the husband says, and this is our last case for today, that if I were to start speaking to you, so the focus is on that, if you speak to me, that's fine. But if I start speaking to you, that's the meaning that we get from there. If I start speaking to you, if I am responsible for bringing about the conversation with you, the inception, I'm responsible for if I incept, if that verb it can be used as a verb, if I introduce, if I start speaking to you, then you're divorced. Then what happens is, she comes and she starts speaking to the husband and the husband responds. Then there will be no divorce, and the oath will fall away and it will be dissolved because of that particular proceedings, and Allah SWT knows best. May Allah grant us an understanding of these concepts. May Allah SWT bless and protect. Barakallahu fikum jami'an. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.